Once again, a very good morning and welcome to the 8th World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization 2026. This happens to be my final reminder for those who are using your handphones to please check your handphones under MCMC Section 35C subsection B of the law, which I just created, for you to kindly check, because there are times when the phone ring, the whole Meru, Manjoy, including Kapung Kepayang, can hear to their phone. Guess what happens? The phone go in jam mode, and then you see the fastest 100-meter runner running out from the ballroom. So please, if possible, to kindly check to ensure that it is in silent mode 101%. Thank you very much, as we do not want this morning's proceeding to be interrupted by handphone ringing. Thank you very much for your kind cooperation. Upon the announcement on the arrival of His Royal Highness Sultan PERAK Darul RIDZUAN, please be upstanding as a mark of respect, after which please continue standing as we will be having the PERAK State Anthem. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great morning, a fruitful one for us to learn, for us to share, for us to care about the whole World Conference on the Islamic Thought and Civilization, brought to you by a panel of learned, respected scholars and speakers across the globe. Thank you and terima kasih. mengumumkan keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak Darul Ridwan diiringi Yang Amat Berhormat Timbalan Perdana Menteri, Yang Amat Berhormat Menteri Besar Perak Darul Ridwan serta Div-Div kenamaan. May Patek respectfully invite all guests to rise for the rendition of the PERAK State Anthem. Para hadirin dipersilakan duduk. Please be seated. Menghadap Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak Darul Ridwan, Sultan Nazri Muizzuddin Shah Ibni Almarhum Sultan Azlan Muhibbuddin Shah Akmafrullah. Ampun tuanku, beribu ampun, sembah Patek, mohon diampun. Patek bagi pihak jawatan kuasa penganjur, the 8th World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization, WCIT2026, dengan penuh hormat dan takzim, merafak sembah, menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih atas limpah perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku, bercemar duli berangkat ke majlis yang penuh bermakna ini. Sesungguhnya, keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku merupakan suatu penghormatan yang amat besar kepada Patek sekalian serta menyediakan lagi majlis pada pagi ini. Ampun tuanku, Patek memohon limpah perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku untuk meneruskan acara ini dalam bahasa Inggeris. Yang amat berhormat Datuk AMAR Haji Fadillah Haji Yusuf, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Energy Transition and Water Transformation. Yang amat berhormat Datuk Seri Saharani Muhammad, Menteri Besar Perak Darul Ridwan. Yang amat berbahagia orang kaya Bendahara Seri Maharaja General Datuk Sri Diraja Tan Sri Dr. Muhammad Zahidi Haji Zainuddin, retired Pro-Chancellor 1, University Sultan Azlan Shah. Honorable Minister and Deputy Ministers, Your Excellencies, distinguished scholars, eminent panelists, honored delegates, ladies and gentlemen. A very good and pleasant Tuesday morning. Patek's name is Katie Pillay, and indeed a privilege and honor to serve as the Master of Ceremonies for this prestigious international conference. Ampun Tuanku, we begin this morning's ceremony by expressing our gratitude to Almighty for the opportunity to gather on this significant occasion since its inception in 2012, the 8th edition of the World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization, WCIT2026, organized by University Sultan Azlan Shah. We are honored to welcome distinguished scholars, policymakers, professionals, and delegates from around the world as we gather today to exchange ideas, promote mutual understanding, and explore issues of global significance through meaningful dialogue and collaboration. This year's conference theme, Where Everyone Matters, Pride and Unity in Islam, brings together participants representing more than 20 countries. Selamat datang and a warm welcome to the beautiful and enchanting state of PERAK, DARUL RIDZUAN. This conference is held under the royal patronage of Duli Yang Maha Mulia PADUKA Sri Sultan PERAK DARUL RIDZUAN, whose gracious support continues to inspire meaningful engagement and intellectual excellence. Ampun Tuanku, to invoke the blessings upon this conference, it is a great pleasure to invite Aiman Ridwan bin Muhammad Ramlan, winner of the 65th International Quran Reading Competition 2025, to recite the Holy Quran from Surah Al-Hujurat, chapter 49, verses 10 to 13.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A'udzu billahi minasy syaithanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ya ayyuhan nasu inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا ولما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبكم وإن تطيعوا الله ورسوله لا يلتكم من أعمالكم شيئا إن الله غفور رحيم إنما المؤمنون الذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله ثم لم يرتابوا وجاهدوا بأموالهم وأنفسهم في سبيل الله أولئك هم الصادقون صدق الله العظيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you very much to AMAR Ridwan bin Muhammad Ramlan. May the timeless message of those sacred verses continue to inspire us to uphold unity, peace, mutual respect, and compassion. With those meaningful reminders imprinted in our hearts, we shall now proceed with the next segment of today's conference. Ampun Tuanku, with your Royal Highness' gracious permission, it's a great pleasure to respectfully invite the Vice Chancellor of University Sultan Azlan Shah and Conference Chair of WCIT 2026, Yang berbahagia Professor Dr. Wan Sabri Wan Yusof to deliver his opening remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin wa bihi nasta'in. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Thank you to Mr. of Ceremony, Master of Ceremony. Menghadap Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak Darul Ridzuan, Sultan Nazrin Mu'izzuddin Shah, Ibni Almarhum Sultan Azlan Muhibbuddin Shah, Al-Maghfurlah, Chancellor University Sultan Azlan Shah. Ampun tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun, sembah patik mohon diampun. Patik mewakili Universiti Sultan Azlan Shah serta para hadirin merafak sembah menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih di atas lipah perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia tuanku bercemar duli berangkat ke 8th World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization, WCIT 2026. Sesungguhnya keberkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku, amat patut sekalian sanjungi dan sudah tentunya akan menyerikan lagi majlis pada pagi ini. Ampun Tuanku, patut merafat sembah memohon ampun limpah perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku untuk patut menyampaikan sembah ucapan dalam bahasa Inggeris. Yang amat berhormat Datuk AMAR Haji Fadillah Haji YUSOF, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Energy Transition and Water Transformation. Yang amat berhormat Datuk Seri Sa'rani Muhammad, Menteri Besar Perak Darul Ridzuan. Yang amat berbahagia Orang Kaya Bendahara Seri Maharaja Jeneral Datuk Seri Diraja Tan Sri Muhammad Zahidi bin Haji Zainuddin, Pro-Chancellor University Sultan Azlan Shah. Honorable Ministers and Deputy Ministers, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, respected speakers and moderators, honored delegates and participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of University Sultan Azlan Shah and WCIT 2026, it is my great honor to welcome you to the 8th World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization, WCIT 2026. Since the inception of WCIT series in 2012, scholars, intellectuals, professionals, and leaders from more than 21 countries have gathered to explore diverse perspectives and share new ideas on contemporary issues affecting humanities. The conference served as a platform for leaders and policymakers, scholars and intellectuals, professionals, and the public to engage freely and articulate their views in a dynamic and rigorous intellectual environment. Such an environment fosters the meaningful exchange of ideas aimed at addressing real and pressing challenges confronting Muslims and Muslim world today. What began as academics, conceptual and theoretical discourse has since evolved significantly. The WCIT series has progressed into an international platform for academic dialogue and has matured into a forum for intellectual and professional engagement, actively seeking practical solutions and developing a realistic program for action. Past editions of WCIT have engaged numerous stakeholders in discussions on issues affecting people and nations across the globe. This year, however, WCIT 2026 focuses specifically on Muslim and Muslim world. In essence, WCIT 2026 seeks to empower Muslims to rethink, re-evaluate, reinvent, and realign themselves within the context of a rapidly changing world. The time has come for a new global narrative, one centered on friendship and partnership, and one that advocates collective ownership of peace and harmony. Just as the non-Muslim world is expected to accept Muslims as they are, Muslims too must not cower behind trivialities or unrealistic claims. In the greater scheme of things, Muslims must step forward as partners and active participants in the global efforts to build a more harmonious and peaceful world. WCIT 2026 aspires to reframe the prevailing global discourse through a new paradigm, one that anchors in unity of humanity. The conference theme, where everyone matters, pride and unity in Islam is a clarion call, particularly to the Muslim world, to embrace the notion of single humanity, ummatan wahida, and to lead in self-examination, self-reflection, and self-correction. Where Muslims are strong, they must serve as beacon and exemplars for the global ummah as rahmah lil alamin, rahmatan lil alamin, a mercy and blessing to all mankind. Where we are weak and or lacking, we must readily acknowledge our limitations and remain open to learning from others. Existential arrogance must be avoided at all costs. In closing, I'd like to extend warmest welcome to all our distinguished guests, esteemed speakers, and valued participants. It is my sincere hope that you will find this conference intellectually stimulating, academically rewarding, spiritually fulfilling, and personally enriching. Welcome to WCIT 2026. Welcome to PERAK. Welcome to Malaysia. In this occasion, I would like to also record our appreciation to the governments of State of Perak, especially to the Menteri Besar Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Seri Sakrani Muhammad, and of course, the founder of WCIT back in 2012, Datuk Seri Dr. Zamri Abdul Kadir, Minister of Higher Education, for their unwavering and continuous support and encouragement in organizing this conference. To all our sponsors, your generosity and commitment have been invaluable in making this conference a reality. On behalf of University Sultan Azlan Shah and WCIT 2026, I extend our deepest appreciation and sincere thanks. To my fellow staff, colleagues, and all those directly involved in organizing the conference, you have worked tirelessly and with remarkable dedication to make this event possible. It would not have been possible without your commitment, sacrifice, and hard work. For that, for much more, I thank you. Demikianlah ucapan patik yang tidak seberapa ini. Ampun tuanku beribu-ribu ampun, sebab patik mohon diampun. Patik menjunjung kasih tuanku. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Yang Bahagia Professor Datuk Dr. Wan Sabri Wan Yusof, Vice Chancellor of University Sultan Azlan Shah and Conference Chair of WCIT 2026. Ampun Tuanku, the organizing committee and delegates are deeply honored by the gracious presence of Duli Yang Maha Mulia PADUKA Sri Sultan Perak Darul RIDZUAN. With utmost respect, may Patik invite Yang Berbahagia Professor Dr. Wan Sabri Wan Yusof to seek the gracious consent of Duli Yang Maha Mulia PADUKA Sri Sultan Perak Darul RIDZUAN Sultan Nazim Muizzuddin Shah Ibni Almarhum Sultan Aslam Muhyiddin Shah Makfurullah to deliver the royal keynote address for the 8th World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization 2026. Ampun Tuanku.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. It gives me great pleasure to be with you this morning at the 8th World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization, hosted by a university that carries a name of particular significance to me. University Sultan Azlan Shah, or in short, University Azlaniyah, stands as a living tribute to a man whose life's work was substantially devoted to the rule of law, to justice administered without favor, and to the conviction that Islamic scholarship must speak not only to matters of ritual and doctrine, but to the ordering of the broader society itself, to governance, to justice, to the institutions upon which a good life for all citizens depends. It is fitting then that the conference bearing his name should take up a theme that sits precisely at that intersection, where everyone matters, pride and unity in Islam. It is in that spirit that I wish to address each of the 5 sub-themes of the conference. I begin with governance and political stability, without which little else we discuss today would matter. A nation may possess abundant resources, a talented population, and a rich culture, and still fail its people if its institutions are weak, its leaders unaccountable, and its politics consumed by self-interest rather than public service. Islamic political thought has always placed enormous weight on the concept of amanah, or trust. In the Islamic tradition, authority is not a privilege to be enjoyed, it is a trust to be discharged, and one for which the trustee will ultimately answer. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam reminded his companions that every one of you is a shepherd and every one of you is responsible for his flock. A leader who forgets this, who begins to see the instruments of state as vehicles for personal or factional advantage, has broken faith not only with the law, but with something more profound. Good governance, in practical terms, means the successful coordination of several essential elements. It means institutions strong enough to outlast any single leader or administration. It means transparency in how public resources are raised and spent, giving citizens confidence that their contributions serve the common good. It means the impartial application of the rule of law, so that no one, however powerful, sits above accountability, and no one, however humble, is denied its protection. And it means a political culture in which disagreement is conducted with civility, the opposition is treated as a legitimate check rather than an enemy, and power changes hands peacefully when the people so decide. Political stability, properly understood, is not the absence of debate. Some of the most stable nations in the world are also among the most argumentative, precisely because their disagreements are channeled through legitimate institutions rather than through the street or the sword. Instability arises not from disagreement itself, but from the erosion of the shared rules by which disagreement is settled. When citizens no longer trust that elections are fair, that courts are independent, and that public office is not for sale, the fabric of the state begins to fray. And it is invariably the most vulnerable, the poor, the marginalized, the voiceless, who suffer first and most acutely. This is why the principle that everyone matters must begin in the halls of government. A budget is a moral document as much as a financial one. It reveals, in the starkest possible terms, whose needs a government has chosen to prioritize. A civil service that acts in the interests of every citizen without regard to race, religion, or political affiliation embodies state unity in its most concrete form. And leaders who govern with humility, who listen before they legislate, and who remember that their power is borrowed rather than owned, do more to secure the loyalty and pride of their people than any slogan ever could. As we consider various crises across the Muslim world, I would urge the policymakers to recognize that good governance is not a luxury for prosperous times, it is a precondition for prosperity itself. Which brings me to our second sub-theme, economic development and cooperation. Here too, society's commitment to the equal worth of every person is tested in the most tangible way through the distribution of opportunity and prosperity. Islam has never regarded wealth as suspect. Trade, enterprise, and the honest accumulation of capital are affirmed throughout our tradition. The Prophet himself was a merchant before he was a prophet. But wealth in Islam is never an end in itself. It carries obligation. The mandatory redistribution of zakat, the endowment structures of waqf, that finance hospitals, libraries, and centers of learning across the classical Islamic world, independent of state fiscal capacity, and the risk-sharing preference embedded in the prohibition of riba, together constitute what economic historians of the Islamic world have characterized as a coherent infrastructure for shared prosperity, distinct in structure from parallel developments in medieval Latin Christendom or elsewhere. These are structural mechanisms built into the architecture of a just economy, ensuring that growth does not simply pool at the top, but circulates toward those in need. The principle is instructive well beyond the specific instrument. An economy is equitable in the fullest sense if its gains are shared broadly enough that ordinary citizens can feel their own lives improving. Development cannot be pursued in isolation. No nation, however talented or resource-rich, thrives by closing itself off from the world. Trade, investment, the exchange of knowledge and technology, these are the currents on which modern prosperity travels. Cooperation between nations, between the public and private sectors, and between government and civil society is the operating condition of sustainable growth. We have seen time and again that economies which embrace open trade while building resilient, diversified industries at home outperform those that retreat into protectionism or over-rely on a single sector. At the same time, cooperation must not become a euphemism for dependency, nor should openness come at the expense of a nation's ability to chart its own course. The wisdom lies in balance, welcoming foreign investment and expertise while building domestic capacity, participating in global supply chains while safeguarding food and energy security, pursuing growth while investing strategically in the industries and skills of the future, so that prosperity is not a passing season, but a durable inheritance for the next generation. And here again, the question of who benefits is paramount. Development that widens the gap between rich and poor, between urban centers and rural hinterlands, between different communities within the same nation, is not development in any meaningful sense. It is simply a consolidation of privilege. A truly Islamic conception of Islamic progress asks not only how much have we grown, but also who has grown with us. Small and medium enterprises, rural entrepreneurs, women seeking to enter the workforce, young people starting their first business. These are not the margins of the economy. They are at the heart of its future, and a wise government invests in them accordingly. The Muslim world today is vast in its scale and rich in its potential. It possesses extraordinary natural resources, occupies strategic positions along the world's busiest trade routes, and is blessed with a young population that, if properly equipped, represents one of the greatest demographic dividends of the 21st century. And yet, intra-OIC trade remains a fraction of what it could be. Too many of our economies remain dependent on the export of raw commodities rather than the export of knowledge, technology, and finished products. Malaysia's own development trajectory, from a commodity-dependent economy in the 1970s to a diversified manufacturing and services-oriented economy today, offers important lessons. It was the product of deliberate policy choices, investment in education, openness to foreign direct investment, balance against domestic capacity building, and a conscious effort to move up the value chain. Islamic finance, despite its enormous potential, remains one of the most underutilized tools for economic cooperation. Malaysia has positioned itself over several decades as a global hub for Islamic finance. From sukuk issuance to takaful to Sharia-compliant fund management. Yet the true promise of Islamic finance extends far beyond compliance with prohibitions of riba. It offers a fundamentally distinctive philosophy of risk sharing, asset backing, and equitable participation in economic gain. If we take that philosophy seriously, Islamic finance could become an engine for cross-border infrastructure investment, for SME financing across the OIC, and for the kind of patient capital that our development challenges, from clean water to renewable energy, desperately require. I turn now to education and social empowerment. If governance provides the structure and the economy provides the means, education provides the substance, the raw material of human capital, unlocked or left dormant depending on the choices we make. The very first revelation to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the command, Iqra, read. Knowledge in the Islamic tradition is treated as a sacred pursuit whose undertaking is an obligation upon every believer, man and woman alike. A civilization that once produced towering scholars in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy did not do so by accident. It did so because it built institutions, libraries, observatories, universities that treated the pursuit of knowledge with the utmost seriousness. And because it welcomes scholars regardless of their background, so long as they had something true to teach. We would do well to recover that spirit today. Education matters first because it is the single most powerful instrument of social mobility available to any society. A child born into poverty who receives a genuinely excellent education gains an opportunity that would be denied to her by almost all other circumstances in her life. Conversely, a nation that allows the quality of a child's schooling to be determined by geography, wealth, or connections is quietly betraying its own promise of equal citizenship. Education matters second because it is the training ground of unity itself. Schools are often the first places where children from diverse backgrounds sit side by side, learn together, and discover that difference need not mean distance. A curriculum that teaches history honestly, that celebrates the contributions of all communities to the nation's story, produces citizens capable of engaging with complexity rather than retreating into tribalism. And education matters third, because the challenges of the coming decades, automation, climate change, an economy increasingly built on knowledge and innovation, will reward societies that have invested deeply and broadly in human capital, and will be unforgiving toward those that have not. This means not only building more schools and universities, but reforming what and how we teach. Strengthening the sciences and mathematics without neglecting the humanities and the arts. Embracing digital literacy while still cultivating the foundational habits of reading, reasoning, and moral reflection. And ensuring that technical and vocational education is given the same dignity and investment as academic pathways, so that a young person who wishes to become a skilled trade person is valued as highly as one who wishes to become a doctor or an engineer. As we progress further into the age of artificial intelligence, our education systems face a further urgent challenge. Rote memorization and standardized testing, which served an earlier industrial economy reasonably well, are poorly suited to a world in which information retrieval is instantaneous and nearly free. What the young need today is the capacity for critical thinking, ethical reasoning, creativity, and adaptability. Precisely the human capacities that AI cannot replicate. And precisely the capacities that a properly conceived Islamic education, rooted in both revealed knowledge and rational inquiry, has always sought to cultivate. Social empowerment through education also demands that we close the gaps that exist. A government that proclaims equal opportunity while allowing vast disparities to persist between boys and girls in certain communities, between well-funded urban schools and neglected rural ones, has not fulfilled its obligation. I think here of the extraordinary contributions of Muslim women scholars, from Fatima Al-Firi, who founded what is recognized as the world's oldest existing university in Fez, to the numerous women today leading universities, ministries, and research institutions in our country and across the region. An education system, indeed a civilization, that does not fully empower half its population is one operating at half its capacity. If everyone truly matters, then every child, regardless of postcode, income, or background deserves a teacher who is trained, a classroom that is safe, and a curriculum that opens doors rather than closing them. I turn next to a subject that may at first glance appear less grand than governance or education, yet is just as revealing of a society's values: public health, and in particular, hygiene and sanitation. Islam places extraordinary emphasis on cleanliness, tahara, as a condition not merely of ritual worship, but of daily life. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is reported to have said that cleanliness is half of faith. This is not a minor detail of religious practice, it is a worldview. It reflects a holistic understanding that the well-being of the body and the purity of the soul are intertwined, and that a healthy community is a prerequisite for a functioning society. We have all been reminded in recent years of how fragile public health can be, and how quickly gaps in sanitation, healthcare access, and hygiene infrastructure can turn into a crisis that spare no one, rich or poor, urban or rural. The lesson is unambiguous. Public health is a public good in the truest sense. A community cannot inoculate itself against disease while its neighbors go without clean water. A city cannot claim to be modern while its poorer districts lack basic sanitation. And a nation cannot call itself prosperous while pockets of its population remain vulnerable to entirely preventable illness. This is why investment in hygiene and sanitation infrastructure, clean water systems, proper waste management, and accessible healthcare facilities, especially in underserved and rural areas, should never be treated as a lesser priority, deferred until more glamorous projects are complete. These investments do not make headlines the way a new highway or a skyscraper might, but they save more lives quietly and consistently than almost any other form of public spending. Equally important is the cultivation of a culture of hygiene from an early age, through schools, through community programs, through the example set by families and local leaders. Public health is not the responsibility of ministries and hospitals alone. It is a shared discipline, practiced in homes, in markets, in mosques, and community halls. When an entire population internalizes the habits of cleanliness, hand washing, safe food production, responsible waste disposal, the burden on the healthcare system eases, and the resilience of the whole society increases. Here too, the principle that everyone matters finds its truest test. A pandemic, a contaminated water source, an outbreak of preventable illness, these do not check the identity card of their victims. They move through populations, wherever essential protections have been neglected, and it is invariably the poorest and most marginalized who are left most exposed. A government's commitment to public health, then, is perhaps the most honest measure of whether it truly believes that every citizen's life is of equal worth. Yet, across parts of the world, including much of the Muslim world, access to clean water and basic sanitation remains alarmingly limited. The consequences are severe. Preventable disease, child mortality, and lost economic productivity that compounds over generations. Malaysia's experience in achieving near universal access to clean water and sanitation offers useful lessons in infrastructure investment, regulatory coordination, and public health messaging. Public health, moreover, must extend beyond infrastructure to public health governance itself. As the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated with brutal clarity, the ability of governments to coordinate, communicate honestly with their populations, and mobilize resources swiftly is itself a test of good governance. Closing the circle between our sub-themes and reminding us that these issues cannot be addressed in isolation from one another. Finally, I turn to national integrity and security, a theme that, in an era of geopolitical volatility, cyber threats, and the weaponization of information, demands particular attention. It is worth pausing on the word integrity, which carries an instructive double meaning in this context. It refers first to the wholeness of a nation, its territorial and institutional coherence, undivided and unbroken. But it also refers to honesty, to moral soundness. A nation's security, I would suggest, cannot be separated from its integrity in this second sense. A country that is secure from external threats, but riddled with internal corruption and injustice, has not achieved true security at all. It has merely postponed its reckoning. Security in the traditional sense remains indispensable. Borders must be defended, institutions protected from subversion, and citizens shielded from threats both foreign and domestic, including the modern scourges of extremism, organized crime, and cyber threats that respect no geography. No amount of good governance, economic growth, or educational achievement can flourish in a nation that cannot guarantee the basic safety of its people. This is a solemn duty, and one that deserves the full resourcing and professionalism it requires. But I would gently insist that the most fundamental and durable form of national security is social cohesion. History offers few examples of a genuinely united, genuinely just society being torn apart by external enemies alone. Far more often, external pressures merely exploit existing internal fractures. Inequality left unchecked, communities left unheard, injustices left unresolved. For Malaysia and the wider Muslim world, national integrity also demands vigilance against the exploitation of religious sentiment for narrow political ends, the manipulation of faith to justify division rather than unity, exclusion rather than the very inclusion that this conference seeks to advance. True national integrity rests on every citizen, regardless of ethnicity or faith, feeling that they have an equal stake in their nation's future. Where that sense of belonging is absent, no amount of security apparatus can substitute for it. At this point, the principle of everyone matters comes back into focus, completing the picture we have been building this morning. National integrity is not maintained by uniformity or by silencing dissent. It is maintained by ensuring that every community, every race, every religion, every region has a genuine stake in the nation's success and can see itself reflected fairly in its laws, its economy, its schools, and its leadership. Unity built on coercion is brittle. Unity built on shared belonging is resilient. And it is precisely this resilience that constitutes the truest form of national security. I have spoken today of governance, the economy, education, public health, and security as though they are 5 separate domains. In truth, they are 5 expressions of a single conviction, one that sits at the very heart of the Islamic tradition, that human dignity is indivisible, and that a nation's greatness is measured not only by the height of its towers or the size of its treasury, but by how it treats its most vulnerable members. Everyone matters is more than a slogan to be celebrated for a single day or a single conference. It is a standard against which every policy, every budget, every school, every hospital, and every law should be measured. Does it include or does it exclude? Does it dignify or does it diminish? Does it widen the circle of belonging or narrow it? Pride, rightly understood, does not arise from domination over others, but from a community's commitment to looking after its own, all of its own, without exception. And unity, rightly understood, is not the flattening of our differences, but their interweaving into a single resilient fabric strong enough to hold every single thread. Let us go forth from this gathering renewed in the conviction that good governance is a trust to be honored, that prosperity is only meaningful when it is shared, that education is a right owed to every child, that health is a public good on which we all depend, and that our security rests as much on the strength of our defenses as on the strength of our bonds to one another. May we be granted the wisdom to build such a society and the humility to remember always that everyone matters. Thank you.
Ampun Tuanku, may Patik respectfully invite the audience to accord Duli Tuanku a standing ovation, please. Patik sekalian, menjunjung tinggi kasih atas cita diraja yang telah disempurnakan oleh Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku. Ampun Tuanku, key points of Duli Tuanku's address today, touching on good governance, healthy democracies, economic development, export and knowledge of technology, Islamic finance, Muslim women scholars, and many more golden nuggets to be ingest and digest further. Ampun Tuanku, Patik will summarize the royal keynote address simply by using the wow factor. Wow meaning windows of the world, wow meaning the world of wonders, and most important, the words of wisdom. Once again, the biggest applause for the incredible and informative speech by His Royal Highness Sultan Nazrin Muizzuddin Shah. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now proceed with the distinguished royal session, graciously attended by Duli Yang Maha Mulia PADUKA Seri Sultan Perak Darul Ridwan. It is now with great pleasure to invite Yang Bahagia, Dr. Afifi Al-Akiti. But before that, we will have a very special video presentation. Sit back, fasten the seatbelts for a very special video.
In a world increasingly challenged by war, humanitarian crises, economic instability, climate disasters, and social uncertainty, millions continue to struggle for peace, security, and hope. Across many parts of the Islamic world, communities are facing rising pressures that threaten not only development and stability, but also the future of the next generation. Yet beyond borders, cultures, and differences, rises a shared belief that no Islamic nation should ever be left behind in the progress of the modern world. World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization, WCIT2026, represents a powerful shift from discussion to action, from ideas to practical strategies that create meaningful impact for societies worldwide. Because true national progress can only be achieved through political stability, ethical leadership, and governance built on integrity and public trust. Through knowledge, education, innovation, and technology, a new generation is empowered to shape the future with wisdom, compassion, and human values. This is the time for Islamic nations to strengthen cooperation, share their strengths, and build a future together, not through division, but through unity.
And now, World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization 2026 marks the beginning of a new journey toward a stronger, more progressive, and respected Islamic world. Because here, everyone matters.
Thank you. It is now with great pleasure to invite Yang Bahagia, Dr. Afifi Al-Akiti, Kuwait Foundation Fellow, Oxford Center for Islamic Studies, United Kingdom, to chair the distinguished royal session, together with the learned panel members consisting of Yang Amat Berhormat, Dr. AMAR HAJI FADILLAH Haji YUSOF, Honorable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Energy Transition and Water Transformation, His Excellency Professor KIETH RETHY CHHEM, Distinguished Professor of AI and Humanities, CamTech University and Senior Minister of Cambodia, Professor Joseph A. MASSAD, Professor of Modern Arab Politics and Intellectual History, Columbia University, USA, and Dr. H.A. HELLYER, Senior Associate Fellow, Royal United Services, Institute for Defence and Security Studies, UK, to kindly take the respective seats on stage. Ampun Tuanku, before beginning the distinguished royal session, it's Patik's honor and privilege to introduce our distinguished chair, Yang Berbahagia Datuk Dr. Afifi Al-Akiti, FRSA. He is the Kuwait Fellow at the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies and a lecturer at the Faculty of Theology, University of Oxford, the university's oldest facility. He is the first Malaysian to be appointed to such a prestigious academic position at the world-renowned University of Oxford. An internationally respected scholar, his expertise spans in Islamic theology, Islamic law, philosophy, finance, and science. He gained worldwide recognition for his landmark 2005 fatwa defending the transgress by censuring the reckless against the killing of civilians, written in response to the 7th July London bombings. The work was widely acclaimed for its principled condemnation of terrorism and the killing of innocent civilians. Beyond academia, Yang Bahagia Dr. Afifi has contributed to several BBC's documentaries, including the award-winning Science and Islam series. Since 2010, he has been listed in the Muslim 500, the world's 500 most influential Muslims, reflecting his enduring global influence in Islamic scholarship. In 2024, he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, FRSA, in the United Kingdom and appointed by the Conference of Rulers in Malaysia as a member of the National Council for Islamic Religious Affairs, MKI, chaired by His Royal Highness Sultan Nazir Muizzuddin Shah, the Sultan of PERAK, Darul RIDZUAN. Please join Patik in extending a warm welcome to Yang Bahagia Datuk Dr. Afifi Al-Akiti, FRSA.
Thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies, Your Royal Highness, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. And indeed, we'd like to welcome our foreign guests, indeed, to our very humble Davos-style session here this morning, following that marvelous royal address, where we now reflect on really the principle that His Royal Highness enunciated, where everyone matters, and looking at pride and unity in the Muslim world. And I'd like to start, in fact, with our first panelist, and I was thinking of doing this from the macro to the micro. You know, we'll start off with geopolitics, with our first panelist, Dr. Hisham HELLYER, indeed a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts himself, and he appears a lot, of course, on CNN and Jazeera, and I always kind of feel very comfortable listening to the calm analysis of Dr. HELLYER, especially in the current, you know, dangerous and stormy global climate, Hisham. And so, thank you for coming, indeed, all the way from the UK, the US, or wherever you may be. But I like to start off by, you know, we keep talking about the rules-based international order, right? And we always hear about that. But Gaza, I think, is the starkest test case of whether we have a rules-based order as well, where we see sustained, documented, almost every day attacks by Israel, and you know, and this is only met by simply statements of condemnation and statements of concern, rather than any action, rather than any enforcement. Even as Tel Aviv continues to defy binding judgments and rulings from the ICJ and warrants from the ICC. So set alongside, this is Gaza, set alongside Ukraine on the one hand, and now the US-Iran war, does Gaza, Hisham, you know, does Gaza show us that this international system was never, you know, it was never rules-based to begin with? Or are we really witnessing this international order collapsing in real time? You know? And if we are witnessing this international order collapsing in real time, you know, what does Gaza specifically, in this case, we ask the question, and just compare that to Ukraine, for instance, where we see things are done quite differently. So particularly when we reflect upon what His Royal Highness has just said about the principle where everyone matters, how would you be able to reflect on this? And I think this is not CNN, this is not Jazeera, and you can be much more franker among friends here. And I think we would like to hear a bit of your wisdom and insight on this, Hisham, please.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Afifi. Many thanks to the organizers, and a warm thanks to Tuanku, His Royal Highness Sultan Nazreen. This gathering, I think, is a testimony to a particular vision, one that I wholeheartedly endorse. And it's a genuine pleasure to be back in Malaysia, a place I spent several years of my life and consider one of my homes. So it's really lovely to be in Malaysia, and particularly in PERAK, after having been away for a couple of years. You raise a very interesting question, and I think it's one that also I was pondering as His Royal Highness mentioned, everyone matters. Before I do, I would just like to sort of frame my comments in a particular way, because I speak here as somebody who's, on the one hand, very much coming from the UK. I'm the son of an Englishman, a British citizen, someone who works at the Royal United Service Institute, which is the oldest think tank in the world, and one that was founded for the promotion of empire. So I sit in the middle of that environment, and I think understand it quite well. And at the same time, very personally, intellectually, I'm very rooted in the Arab world. I just flew in from Cairo. You were asking where I was coming from. I just flew in from Cairo. And these two vantage points don't always agree with one another, because of course, one will be the imperial, the other will be the one who's visited upon by imperialism. And I don't expect them to agree, but they've led me to a single conclusion on this particular point especially. And I try to elaborate on this rules-based order contradictory notion in a recent essay that I wrote for the European Institute of the Mediterranean, which was entitled "The Rules Remain, the Application Does Not." And that's really my answer to you. I don't think the choice was ever between a rules-based order was never real and it's collapsing. I think the institutions remain. I think the treaties remain. I think international law as an institution remains. But what has changed is the confidence, I think, that many of us have that those rules constrain power equally. Or asking the question as it's posed here, whether or not indeed everyone matters, at least for those in power. And it's not simply that, people in the West are only now noticing what was not universal to begin with. I think it goes further than that. I think the rules, again, they remain, but their application doesn't. And this is why Gaza in particular matters so much. There's something very unique about this particular genocide. And of course, it's not the first time that we've seen genocide. But I think it's the first time that we've seen genocide so rawly, so blatantly, every day, every hour, in the full view of the world, and underwritten by the most powerful nations of the world. And I think that transforms how many of us have actually seen and understand international order. Of course, after World War II, there was an international order that was put in place. It never promised perfect justice. It promised something much more modest, which was constraint. And constraint was supposed to mean, and I say supposed to mean, that international law was real and that violating it carried certain costs, diplomatic costs, political costs, economic costs, and so on. And yes, there were always inconsistencies. You can think about Iraq and the invasion of Iraq by the US and the UK. You can think about the continual occupation of Palestine by the Israelis from 1967 onwards, and of course Sinai at the time and the Golan Heights. The promise was never perfection. The promise was always constraint, and there were always latent inconsistencies. But when it comes to Gaza, Gaza didn't invent double standards. That's not the case. It made those double standards simply impossible to ignore, and I think it made those double standards almost evaporate in the sense that we now simply don't have standards to rely on. Never have we seen in our lifetimes or before such extraordinary documentation of how international law has been violated, how genocide is taking place. We've seen institutions of international law put into effect. You mentioned the ICJ, the ICC. There are many other instruments in this regard that have simply been ignored. Repeated UN findings, humanitarian agencies documenting these sorts of events on a daily basis, really. And in other words, every single accountability mechanism that exists and was available to the international system was activated and ignored. It was activated and ignored. And when you compare this to how we responded to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, many systems were activated. It's not perfect. Of course, Russia didn't withdraw, but there was a cost, and there continues to be a cost. Whereas when it comes to Gaza, these instruments, they're symbolic. At best, they're symbolic. No accountability, no effective cost, no price really to be paid. And that has an impact, of course, on the international system. It means that confidence in it simply evaporates. Gaza doesn't destroy international law. It evaporated any confidence that it would be applied. And of course, these are different conflicts, but when you look at this, as you mentioned, ICJ provisional measures, ICC arrest warrants, not only were these ignored, but they were insulted. You had countries that otherwise were promoting the application of the ICC, the application of international law, saying very clearly, no, we're going to host Netanyahu. We're going to allow flights from Israel to pass through our territory, knowing that Netanyahu is on it, and so on. So it becomes incredible to imagine that the underwriters of the system become the most exquisite exhibitions of how the system doesn't actually have any weight to it at all. And when you consider what Tel Aviv, what the Israelis have committed, this is really quite extraordinary. And we now see around the world so many realizing that if this is the nature of this international system, then what are we really fighting for here? And I think this matters very much in this region as well. I don't think it's purely an Arab world issue or a Middle Eastern issue or European issue. I think it matters in Southeast Asia as well, in the Nusantara, where, again, I've been very pleased to have spent quite a lot of time over the years. And I think just recently, ASEAN foreign ministers gathered. They insisted on the importance of international law, again, as they should. This, of course, was related to the freedom of navigation and maritime shipping and so on. But again, it's not that international law, even in that situation, has been applied. The United States and Israel launched an illegal war against Iran, despite the critiques, and I have many when it comes to Iran. But international law, again, just simply put to one side, and no costs. The costs were economic in spite of the international system, not because of it, unfortunately. Great powers insisting on having options outside of the system itself. And I think that's incredibly important to keep in mind. The situation of Gaza, and we could go on, and we should go on, about how utterly evil it is to see all of this criminality when it comes to Gaza. But I think people ought to remember it doesn't remain contained to Gaza. The impact on international order, the impact on confidence in mechanisms of international law, these will go far beyond Gaza. These will go beyond other conflicts in the future. And when we consider the climate crisis that we are living through that is going to increasingly become worse, we need institutions of international law. We need institutions of international order, if only to mitigate the damage that will be wrought against the most vulnerable of peoples. A generation now of diplomats, of officials, of policymakers, they've watched Iraq, they've watched Ukraine, they've watched Gaza, and they've seen all of these things unfold in a relatively short period. And now their conclusion is relatively simple. Power precludes law. Power precludes law. Alliances preclude institutions. This isn't inherited cynicism now, it's becoming the baseline. And that's why I come back to the same conclusion that I came to in the essay I mentioned. The rules remain, the applications do not. But I think it's important not to end there. I think it's important to recognize that Gaza has provoked a profound global reaction, precisely because people still believe that we have to have rules and that the rules must matter. If nobody believed in international law anymore, I don't think there'd be any outrage in the fact that there was such selective application. So the challenge before all of us, whether in Europe or North America or in the Arab world or in Nusantara, is not to abandon the idea of a rules-based international order, but to insist that it become genuinely universal. Because the day that international law ceases to protect the powerless and only protects the powerful, then it's not law at all. It doesn't protect anyone. If we genuinely believe in the importance of an international rules-based order of any sort, then our task is not to defend its rhetoric, it's to insist upon its universality. Because rules that apply to only some are no rules at all. They're simply privileges. And a world governed by privileges rather than principles is a far more dangerous world, I think, for everybody and every country in this world. Indeed, as Tuanku mentioned, everyone matters, so let us make it so. Thank you.
Thank you, Hisham. I think, well, for those of us, in fact, watch science fiction, you know, things like Star Trek, you have the United Federation of Planets, and then you have the Prime Directive. That's disregarded. And when Hisham mentioned that power excludes law, this is precisely the point of where you get, in a world where you actually have Star Trek, where the Prime Directive can be where everyone matters, unless you have that power to basically uphold that rule of law. In that sense, it just, you know, it becomes the rule of the jungle there. But we turn next to Professor Joseph MASSAD, all the way here. Joseph, you've flown from Columbia University via Egypt, and I know you're on sabbatical this year. And you know, you've authored, I mean, you're a professor of modern Arabic politics, and you've authored at least 4 to 5 books. And in your work, you've argued that independence and self-determination, and in particularly in your forthcoming book, where you're making the argument about how colonial settlers, and not just colonialism, is actually the main lasting feature that defines the global age today. And I think this is, you know, I mean, you made that argument, and you also made the argument that Palestine, the Palestinian case, is not, you know, it is not an exceptional settler colony. Against many others who've actually argued that. But you've actually quite insightfully, and I think quite brave, if I may say so, making the argument that in the Palestine case is actually behaving like, you know, like with many other settler colonial settlements, you know. So whether it is in the Middle East itself, in the Arab world itself, or whether in Africa, or whether the world at large. So Joseph, could you elaborate how this is so, and how, you know, and how would your argument in this case impact the contemporary political discourse globally as well as regionally?
Thank you for your question. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for hosting me. I think, one of the most interesting things that I found out in my research throughout is a lot of the notions that we consider to be perhaps liberatory, anti-oppressive, such as the notion of a nation's independence, the notion of self-determination, or even national liberation, in fact, all come from white settlers. National liberation actually begins with the Crusaders in Palestine and Pope Urban's insistence on the so-called liberation of Jerusalem from its Muslim rulers. We see how national liberation would transpose later on and come to be used to very different ends. The term independence, of course, is actually invented by white American settlers when they sought to separate from the mother country about 250 years ago, for the purpose of not sharing in the profits, for the purpose of continuing to steal native land across Appalachia, which the British had decided to stop them from doing, and for the purpose of continuing the slave system, which was already facing cases of abolition in the courts in Britain. And we see that independence for white settlers in the US and subsequently in the Americas did not lead, it was more of an economic independence as well as a political independence in the US. Its legacy has been anything but, as in the speech that was given earlier by His Royal Highness, the question of economic independence seems to elude many countries, including Muslim countries, who continue to export, for example, raw material to the first so-called industrialized world, and that this is not incidental, of course, but rather the prevention of economic independence for countries that successfully decolonized politically, especially after World War II. Self-determination itself, as a notion which emerges strongly after World War I, is in fact built on the notion of the consent of the governed that we begin to see elaborated by white settlers of South Africa and elsewhere, subsequently used in even in the Dutch settler colony of Batavia in nearby Indonesia, by the French and Spanish settlers in North Africa, especially in Algeria. So even self-determination, which begins, in fact, as a white settler notion to separate from the mother country, and subsequently gets to be adopted by the colonized and those who are denied equal rights by the colonists, whether the colonial mother countries or the settler colonists. And again, what you end up achieving is something of very limited value compared to those achieved by the white settlers in terms of, again, economic rights and political rights. Perhaps this is most illustrative in the end of apartheid in South Africa in 1994, which really meant the end of political apartheid, but not of economic apartheid, which was the price willingly ultimately paid, if you will, by the African National Congress to achieve the end of political apartheid, meaning that the white settlers were able to maintain and keep all their ill-gotten wealth that they achieved during the colonial settler apartheid regime. In this sense, we see also that Palestine is illustrative of many settler colonies, including in the Arab world. People forget that Morocco, Libya, Algeria, and Tunisia were also settler colonies, like Palestine. And sometimes people attribute some uniqueness or perhaps inventiveness to the Zionist colonists who are European Jews, descendants of European converts to Judaism, often invoking that they are somehow the direct descendants of the ancient Hebrews of Palestine. In fact, the argument pushed by the Zionists is a replica of arguments used earlier and later by other colonial settlers. When the French invaded and colonized Algeria, they insisted that they, as descendants of the ancient Roman Empire, were actually returning to the Roman lands in North Africa, and that the Arabs of North Africa are the real colonists rather than the indigenous population. The Italians made a similar argument when they invaded and colonized Italy, that they were again returning, quote unquote, to their original Roman lands, and that the native Arabs of Libya and Berbers of Libya were the ones who were actually interlopers or colonists. So the idea that European converts to Judaism would claim they were returning, quote unquote, to Palestine based on the fact that this was the ancient land of the Hebrews from whom they claimed descent is just another unoriginal replicated idea. The idea, for example, also that the Arabs or the Palestinian population sought to throw the Jewish colonists into the sea comes directly from African settler colonialism, especially in Namibia and Mozambique, where a Mozambican politician at the time claimed that the Africans want to throw the white colonists into the sea. So again, a lot of these things that pass as original or unique to Zionist settler colonialism or to Palestine, in fact, replicate an existing sort of discourse elsewhere in settler colonies, in the Arab world and elsewhere. We see also, in addition to this, the situation today is one of a demographic danger, in the sense that most settler colonies who maintained settler colonial rule are those who are able to eliminate by sort of conquest and genocide the native population, or to overwhelm the native population with a huge amount of settlers. So we see this in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, where the natives were either killed, or genocidally killed, or overwhelmed with immigrants. Today we have perhaps 3 settler colonies where this is quite difficult to achieve. New Caledonia is a place where the French have been trying to overwhelm the local Kanak population with French settlers. They've been partially successful, but in danger, because now there almost is equity, demographic equity, which is endangering the colonial settler rule of France in New Caledonia. We've seen a lot of movement in the last couple of years of major demands to end French white colonial rule. Northern Ireland is another situation where the demographic supremacy of the Protestant settlers and their descendants is now in jeopardy, because they've become, for the first time in their history, a minority. Palestine, or Israel since 2010, also the Jewish population, which was imposed on Palestine since World War I by the British and slightly earlier before them, has now also become a minority. They successfully became a majority through ethnic cleansing in 1948. Today they are, since 2010, they've become a minority in all the areas which Israel governs, which also explains the uneasiness and the anxiety which the Israeli colonial settler and Jewish supremacist regime feels. The genocide in Gaza is one of the attempts to deal with the demographic danger, where Jews have become a minority in Palestine again, despite the best efforts of Israel. And as a result, we begin to see, of course, a certain exceptional treatment by international powers, especially the US itself, a settler colony, but not so much in the sense that before the genocide, we do not see, for example, countries or the United Nations intervening at the behest of the Maori population of New Zealand, or the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, Native Americans in the US, or First Nations in Canada. So I think the double standard has to do with settler colonies versus colonies. The reason why I think our modern world is defined by settler colonialism is because most nations who are colonized were actually colonized for anywhere between 30 to 100 years maximum with official colonialism. But settler colonialism has been around for about 400 years. It actually is much longer in duration. It has continued to dominate the areas where it rules, more so than formal colonialism, which replaced itself, I guess, with neo-colonial economic rule. So in that sense, I think Palestine is only an exception insofar as settler colonial regimes continue to be immune to the kinds of interventions by the international community that non-settler regimes are not immune to in a way. So Israel, in that sense, has not committed any of its horrendous crimes in a vacuum. On the contrary, as we've seen, after October 7th, all the major colonial countries and the settler colonies immediately came to Israel's aid. The fact that Israel is the last settler colony in Asia or Africa which maintains racially supremacist laws on the books, upwards of almost 70 laws at the moment, and has to be maintained by the power of the United States to the detriment of the world. Indeed, it has brought the world to the verge of a third world war. In fact, the ongoing raging war at the moment caused by the aggression of the US and Israel on Iran is a continuation of the attempt to save Israel from itself and to save its sort of racially supremacist regime. So in that sense, I feel that while there is a certain exceptionalism to Palestine in the way it's treated in international fora, I think it is an exception that accords with the settler colonial exception rather than something else. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you, Joseph. You know, it's interesting because, of course, you're from the Middle East originally, of course, and now you're teaching at Columbia University. And you come from that Palestinian even, mashallah, and coming from that Western hemisphere, I mean, here you are now in Asia. And if you take a leaf out of the book of the East, as it were, and I remember, I mean, in fact, last year when was it 2 years ago, I met Minister RETHY actually when we were in China for a civilizational dialogue there. Jeff Sachs made the argument that China is an example where they don't engage in settler colonialism, if you like. Then I pushed back on this and said, well, really? You know, what about Korea and maybe Vietnam? So they had to qualify, but they said, only for the chopstick empire.
Well, I mean, I think the Kuomintang were settler colonists in Taiwan.
Right.
I mean, this is how Taiwan came about. And therefore, that is the major settler colony that took place by the Kuomintang and Chiang Kai-shek after the revolution. But I mean, Mao had something very interesting to say to a visiting Palestine Liberation Organization leader back in the 60s that said basically what the European powers have done is created Taiwan for us and Israel for you, on sort of to, in a way, surround Asia with these two settler colonies. I thought that was always a very interesting thing to say.
Sure. Well, thank you. Well, I'll give a very big warm thanks in here, Professor Joseph. And that really brings to the point of His Royal Highness's powerful message earlier, because it really is all about human dignity at the end of the day. And I think your thesis there certainly would gain currency from the fact that you're not trying to show, in the case of Palestine, it is an exceptional case. We are all human beings after all, and the rule of law should apply to all. Equally, indeed. Yes. Yeah. So, and now, next we turn to Minister RETHY, and you know, of course, I met you first back in China, you know, for the Ningbo dialogue. It was a wonderful occasion there, and of course, Minister RETHY has a very interesting background. He had been in the UN system. You were in the IAEA. You wrote the Fukushima report about the Japanese nuclear meltdown. Although you're here as a professor of AI and humanities from CamTech University, and you're very keen to remind me that you're not speaking on behalf of, you know, you're not here on your official capacity as a minister, of course, in Cambodia. But Minister RETHY, I think we can't help listening to both Dr. HELLYER earlier and now Professor MASSAD, all these geopolitical issues will lead me to ask you something about the conundrum and the problems over regional multilateral organizations. You see, I think we live in an age where regional multilateral organizations are being tested by great power competition. So whether in the EU, whether in the African Union, whether here, regionally here in ASEAN. So my question is very simple for you, Minister, and that is consensus-based regionalism still a viable model for managing a bloc's collective interest in a multipolar world, right? Because we are seeing really the frayings of it, you know. So, or does it inevitably produce paralysis where exactly unity matters, as called for by His Royal Highness in his powerful royal address earlier? So what would you say to this, Mr. Rethy? Yeah.
Thank you. Your Royal Highness, distinguished colleague, it's a pleasure, a great honor to be here. When I was invited to attend this prestigious conference through Dr. Afifi, the title of the conference really touched my mind and my heart, Islamic thought and civilization. People who know me ask me the question, Rethy, who are you? I'm a medical doctor, starting with nuclear physics, and then got education of Southeast Asia, and then moved to history. So with all of this, I think it affects the way I think, and mostly how I challenge historiography and the methodology of when people teach geopolitics and international relations. First, ASEAN to me is at my heart. I just love ASEAN. The reason why I came back, certainly Cambodia is one thing, but ASEAN as an organization. And Southeast Asia, I just love the geography here. Last night with the rain, tropical rainforest, to me is something that made me dream. It's touched my heart. So ASEAN is a young regional organization whose members are heirs to civilizations that have interacted over 1,000 years. Let's not forget that. Yeah. And when you read geopolitics book, we tend to forget that. So in order to answer your question, allow me to share with you, it's not talking about myself, but my epistemic journey that will explain my reflexivity and my positionality. First, I was born in Cambodia, but I lived 35 years in the West and 35 years in this part of the world. So with this epistemic education from a French school in Phnom Penh, and also added with Buddhist monastic education during summertime, and so I can look, I don't pretend that I know, but at least I have the freedom to look at geopolitics, international relations, outside looking in. I can be very critical to what happened over here, but at the same time, looking in, looking out, being also critical of all this grand theory that we learn in international program. And when I say critics, it's more like academic critics. So with this, I am now what anthropologists call a participant observer of what's going here. 50 years ago, Cambodia was in war, proxy war, victim of the Cold War, and all of Cambodians suffer from that, including myself. I witnessed the death of my father during that crisis and challenged what happened, or what people told Cambodia was not what happened in Cambodia at that time. So we were victim by choosing probably the wrong side of history, etc. So all of that had triggered a philosophical question and, for me, a purpose of my life. So I studied medicine, but on the side, I did a PhD in ASEAN studies. So I know academically ASEAN studies. I created a Society of History of Medicine in Southeast Asia, HOMSI. And why did I bring that up here? It's not about my achievement, but because when you look at the practice and the history and tradition of the practice, diverse practices of history of medicine in Southeast Asia, you look at the social network and the interaction within the society. And to quote a very famous professor from Prussia, from Germany, Rudolf Virchow, he said that politics is nothing else but medicine on a grand scale.
Yeah.
So I learned through that if you look at the patient and you look at society, what's wrong with society with scientific criteria, you may put together, come to a kind of diagnosis, treatment, policy intervention, and follow-up, monitoring, evaluation. Maybe you can treat and push your society toward progress for that. And also, ASEAN, I have been also involved practically in ASEAN activity. I will come to the consensus. Actually, in practical terms, we should have been able to achieve a consensus because every year we have hundreds and hundreds of meetings. And at one point last mandate, I was the chairman of ASEAN COSTI Committee of Scientific Innovation in Cambodia. So this is my background and my ethos for that. So what I have observed from the historical point of view also, that this part of the world has beautiful ancient civilization that interacted a lot for that. And despite this interaction, this background, we tend to forget when we come to politics, to geopolitics, and many aspects of the challenge in the region we have not been able to find a consensus. So consensus, to put in a simple definition, for some people, consensus is preserving friendship, relationship, and harmony. For others, is signing agreement. So the term is very important, and this is a huge gap also. I have been influenced by the Austrian philosopher Wittgenstein for language. You start to define the language before you start to talk. So all of this, consensus cannot be built without trust, and this trust is still an endeavor that needs to be pursued for that. So if you look at 1,000 years ago, we have to look at the wisdom of the kingdom of Sriwijaya, the wisdom at Angkor, or the wisdom at Pagan. All this we found out. I did a PhD on history also, and through records, historical record, we just realized that there are actually a lot of circulation of ideas and thought in this region. So we have been, our network, our building, we have a lot of shared civilizational roots that we tend to forget. So all of this, it brings me to the reflection and what fits well here to this World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization, is to look at how consensus can be built based on our past wisdom that have us to be together for the last 2,000 years. So first, I think wisdom should be brought up at any discussion in policy making. People tend to forget. Policy is not written for policymaker, and I love the wisdom of Your Highness when you said the budget is a moral obligation, is a moral contract. Right. Everything is about wisdom. Where we tend to forget about wisdom, in politics, wisdom seems to be pushed back far away. So wisdom is one value that exists in Buddhist tradition, exists in Islamic tradition, in Confucius. So if we bring ancient wisdom, maybe we can find way to talk peacefully. Second part is justice. You have to listen to the voice, and we look at the 11 members of ASEAN, different level of economic development, social development. The weakest should be heard also. There is no peace possible if you leave something behind. And the wonderful title here is, everyone matters. Third value is harmony. And harmony is praised in Islamic thought, is praised by Confucius. This a mutual respect and harmonious society is important. And finally, at the end, following wisdom, justice, and harmony as values, shared responsibility is so important. And this exists in all traditional, ancient tradition of wisdom. In Buddhism, we call dependent origination. Paticca samutpad, everyone depends on others. And beyond that, not only person depend on others, we depend also on the animal kingdoms, on plant and trees, on rock and things. So in the interaction here, if you were to follow Buddhist principle of the Paticca samutpad, that simply we need to respect nature also. And when you look back at the Islam, certainly, I apologize, this is not my expertise, but I read about moral truth. Moral truth, and I learned a word is amana, moral truth for
Amana.
amana, yeah. I don't need to explain that. And also from Confucius is that reciprocal duty issue. So there are, when you look in the past, many values were shared by many ethnic group, many civilization. And I believe that if you were to consider those highest values than policy, we may be able to find a way to get that consensus for the best interest of all. So next step would be, consensus here. What will be the role of ASEAN? We have been a victim of international media, now social media, of what I call the conditioned worldview. I teach international relations and geopolitics also for the last 8 years, and certainly we use the same books that taught at Oxford, at Columbia, in Paris, or in Cambodia, same books. But when I read those books with a little bit of distance, and when I bring in those higher values of Paticca samutpad, amna, and then from the reciprocal duty, the political theory has been written by the interests of a certain kind of civilization, that thing that dominate the thing. So I have been deeply influenced by, probably many in the rooms also, by Edward Said, the Orientalism. And my current research, and I continue to do that, if we want to build trust among countries, among civilization, we must look at how we rebalance that epistemic dominance from the West. It has been a dominant, and myself, I was lucky to have been brought up in the Buddhist values here and in the West coming back to develop their critical thinking. But this has been said also, I never said that all Western values are wrong. There are beautiful values in all civilizations. So to come back to conclude your question here about consensus, there's a long way to go. But if there is a will, political will, to build trust, we should be able to do something. And this pressure from many people in the media, scholars call the New World Order, I will call it humbly the New World Disorder. It creates more havoc to the world than create peace. A New World Order should reflect a beauty of a new thing that we expect to come. But this New World Disorder creates so much suffering, and we all know, looking at the media. So what to do for ASEAN? Very humbly, from the philosophical point of view, I think that we should not, as ASEAN, as a regional organization, we should not submit to any other. Easy to say, but difficult to do. But above all, much easier to do is ASEAN to engage with all, with all. And at the end of the day, when people ask me, RETHY, which power grab should we choose? I think that I reply very simply, intuitively, common sense. I choose ASEAN. As simple as that. It's not difficult, easy, but at the same time, there is some wisdom from experience in life. All of us know that most of the time we have no choice, but the superpower, the big guy chose us, and it led to the destruction of Cambodia. And last point, I like to mention also because I teach AI and humanities, and this will change. This is more than the threat of classic geopolitics from a nation to another for security reason. And this also, if you consider values or philosophical values, I tend to think that we spend time giving grant for scholars to write about security studies. Due respect to my colleagues, I think we should do also some research on studying insecurity of superpower leader, insecurity that lead to security interventions. So from the geopolitical point of view, it's about nation, region, and region, but AI is coming. And AI, from my research, medicine, when you have a new technology emerging, two sectors benefit the most, the military and medicine. And in medicine, we use that since the early 80s, not as good as now, but now it becomes the tool of all walks of life. And this is very important. And from my research is that number one, AI is not intelligent. No. And number two, AI is not wise.
Correct.
No. I can share with you humbly why, because I did some research, and I'm writing with some colleague a trilogy on ancient wisdom and AI. We have published Buddhist Mind for AI. We just finished Confucius or AI, and I have just started another book with some colleague in Malaysia with my good friend, my brother, Professor Fauzi. I don't know if he's here, on Islamic wisdom and AI. So with this, for looking at the history now, not history of a nation, but history of humankind, millions of years, and then 150,000 since Homo sapiens came. Never ever our civilization with an S, all civilization in this world are facing not only existential threat, but real threat from a machine. And I will end it here. Instead of fighting each other human to human, I think we should endeavor to make sure that we remain human with the wisdom and the passion and the compassion that our ancestors had taught us through Islamic thought and civilization, Buddhist thought, Confucius thought, etc. So with this, let wish all together to our humankind that we remain human. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister RETHY. So, quite provocative there. I mean, the suggestion that instead of just looking into security studies, one should also look into insecurity of the great powers that has led to some of the, well, you foresee kind of the coming of a new world order really from that. But one of the things that actually, benefited from your insight there, particularly when you picked on Wittgenstein. Of course, the use of language is particularly important when you're building consensus. And it's one of the things that reminds me of the Muslim tradition. We have this great Muslim philosopher, theologian Al-Ghazali, famously said, once the substance, once the meaning is understood, then it doesn't really matter whatever terms or names or labels you use. And that's why Rumi, for example, famously, the famous great Sufi thinker in the Muslim tradition, said that all of the wars in the world are basically started because of names, and people actually argue over names. But Thank you, Minister. We finally turn now to the home team. Here we have the Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia. And Deputy Prime Minister, I mean, when I was just, and in fact, just hearing over your introduction, you know, about your portfolio earlier, you are in fact the Minister of Energy Transition and also Water Transformation. And it's quite an interesting portfolio because if you take this from a chapter from the book of, say, Game of Thrones, this is like the Minister of Fire, not and Ice, but Fire and Water, you see. So I have just this rather, if I may, Your Excellency, just one simple question, really, given your portfolio. Energy security and maritime security, water security, if you like, used to be treated as two separate policy domains. Increasingly, however, these two, you know, security matters, energy and water, are increasingly becoming the same problem. And we see these clearest, of course, with the Straits of Hormuz crisis, you know, the choke points and the problem over the sea lane in the Strait of Hormuz. And inshallah, we make dua that the Straits of Malacca will never have that same problem. But the point here is that how, I mean, trade routes are becoming central to how, you know, great power competition actually plays out. So, do you see, Minister, how, you know, in this case, the global order could be shaped by, you know, maritime corridors in this case, or by just traditional military power, or even diplomatic power? That was three.
Thank you, Dr. VP. Royal Highness, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity. Sure. I think it's a fair observation by you. If you look at what's happening in this year, it demonstrates that the energy security and maritime security are no longer separate issues. They are now deeply interconnected. So what happened 1,000 miles away from our shores can affect us in terms of electricity prices, fuel supplies, trade, and more importantly, it will also affect the livelihood of ordinary people. So this is the real happening right now in the world. So if you look into what happened, recent development in the Strait of Hormuz, as I said, although it happened far away from our shore, but it really impacts not only Malaysia, but the whole global value chain. Right. And with that, it's not only about talking about the energy markets, but also in terms of logistics. The international shippings are also affected. Right. Thus, it also affects in terms of insurance will be increased. Right. Cost of energy will be increased. Cost of supply chain will be increased. So these are the areas, the reality that we are facing right now. So Malaysia's position is very clear. We have been very consistent all along. We want to be friends with all nations in the world. What more to say that we are a trading nation. And we are fully aware as a trading nation which is located or situated right in one of the strait which is very important in terms of trading, which is the Strait of Malacca. So anything happen in that particular area will not only implicate Malaysia, but entire global citizens. The business will be affected. The supply chain will be affected. And thus, it will definitely affect the entire global community. So with that, our stand is we cannot be complacent. Right. So that's why immediately once the conflict happened in the Middle East, in particular in Iran and also Israel, what we did was to get the entire government agency to sit down through the Economic Council to identify what will be the challenges that we're going to face and how are we going to address it, to make sure that not only the supply chain, not only in terms of energy security, but how do we address to make sure that our people will get sufficient supply of fuel, for example. Right. So these are immediate steps that are taken by Malaysia. And of course, we engage with all international countries in terms of our diplomatic arrangement to make sure that our shipping are safe and secure, that we'll be able to get our supply. And alhamdulillah, so far, through the connection of Prime Minister, we are able to get our ship now passing all through the Hormuz. And more importantly, right now is for us to prepare how do we address the future to make sure that resilience is actually preparing ourselves now, not waiting for the crisis to happen. So yes, to me, the corridors or maritime corridors is becoming more critical in terms of national security, but I will look at it slightly differently because to me, it's not about control. It is about to make sure that we can secure it so that there'll be a safe pass-through of the passage. The passage remain open, and end of the day, the trade will be free among all the nations in the country. So it is accessible to all. So this is, to us in Malaysia, it is a responsibility for us to take care, to make sure that Selat Melaka, for example, is secure, safe, and also accessible to all. So whatever happens will also implicate us in terms of not only in terms of commerce, but in terms of the economic growth, in terms of energy affordability. If we look into what's happening right now, to me, we should approach it by a simple management approach, right, which is looking into the two circles, which is number one, circle of concern. Circle of concern is something that is beyond us, but we must keep in mind that these are the challenges that we're going to face, but it will not be within our control. But at the same time, we have to focus on the circle of influence, something within us, something that we can control. So now we are focusing into that. If we observe the speech by His Majesty Rasna, so we need focus on our human capital, on education, on all the good values, so that by focusing into the strength, internal strength, to make sure that we can guarantee not only in terms of security of energy, but security of our people in all aspects. Security in terms of economy, security in terms of social well-being of people. Right. So these are the areas that we need to focus on. So to me, that will be the approach of Malaysia, to make sure that we have to focus, strengthen our internal processes, at the same time try to influence the rest of the world, that whatever happen, that whatever action that we're taking, it will also give implication to the rest of the world. So that should be the area that we need to focus on. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Well, I mean, it's actually quite heartening. Your decisive answer, if I may say so here, would be even equivalent. I'm not a CNN journalist like Becky Anderson or Farid Zakaria, but they could have asked you the naughty question of, essentially, you answered the question to, would Malaysia, Indonesia, or Singapore wanted to impose a toll for the State of Malacca? And you've done admirably well there.
No, as I said earlier, our responsibility is to make sure it is open and accessible to all.
For the world.
Because if we close it, if we charge anything, we'll be charged also whenever we pass other streets in the world. So we have to be...
Thank you, Minister. one of the things that I'd learned from my engagement with your good self, Your Excellency, was that the Deputy Prime Minister, in fact, sees himself as an honorary Perak citizen himself, because he spent 6 years of his life in, was it Bagan?
7 years. In
7 years.
Paribunta.
Paribunta. So I think, so welcome home in that
Thank
sense, and in the presence of His Majesty here, mashallah. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've had a wonderful journey from looking at geopolitics all the way from, the global side with Dr. Hisham, going to Professor MASSAD in the Middle East, the Arab world, going to ASEAN with Minister RETHY, and indeed finally at home here in Malaysia. And of course, all good things must come to an end. And one of the things that we like to always pray and make dua of course, is that we pray that the United Nations today do not suffer the same fate, the irrelevancy of the League of Nations. And that's why, in a way, when I actually brought up Star Trek, a kind of a model, and interesting, the United Federation of Planets, that I know it's an ideal, it's an aspiration, but that is a sort of target that we want to go for. And really, this can only be made possible when we actually look at our souls and the wisdom as mentioned by Mr. RETHY just now. If we invoke the principle as called upon by our Royal Highness just now, that power of where everyone matters. I think if we keep that in your sights, inshallah, we will reach the destination where everybody, when everyone and everybody matters, we can be united in this very small world of ours. And may, inshallah, God forgive us all. And, well, ladies and gentlemen, Your Royal Highness, Your Excellency, so we'd like to now give a very, very warm thanks to all of the panelists. They've done superbly, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much once again to distinguished Chair, Your Bahagia Dr. Afifi Al-Kaiti, together with the fellow learned and respected speakers. The distinguished royal session has definitely provided profound insights into the current challenges and opportunities shaping our world, from global conflicts and economic development to sustainable progress. True prosperity and peace must be inclusive, guided by justice, love, compassion, and unity. Above all, it has reaffirmed the enduring theme, where everyone matters, pride and unity in Islam. Ampun Tuanku, Your Royal Highness, Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have now arrived at the conclusion of the opening ceremony of the 8th World Conference on Islamic Thought and Civilization 2026. On behalf of University Sultan Azlan Shah, we humbly convey our deepest gratitude and highest appreciation to Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak Ridwan for graciously consenting to grace this august occasion and for officiating this morning's conference. Duli Tuanku's royal presence has truly bestowed great honor and distinction upon this gathering. Following this ceremony, Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku will graciously proceed to visit the conference exhibition. To all esteemed delegates, we extend our warmest wishes for a rewarding, insightful, and a productive conference. May your deliberations foster meaningful dialogue, inspire innovative ideas, and contribute significantly to the advancement of Islamic thought and civilization. Ampun Tuanku, beribu ampun sembah patik, mohon diampun. Mengumumkan keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Paduka Seri Sultan Perak Ridwan diiringi Yang Amat Berhormat Timbalan Perdana Menteri, Yang Berhormat Menteri Besar Perak Ridwan serta Div-Div Kenamaan.